When it comes to presenting your data in your results, um, table captions go above tables. So rather than just having like a table heading, what you do is you put a caption in that describes what your table is about, the key results from your table. You would put in brackets your p-value that you calculated. And when you show a table for like a scientific paper, you'll notice that they don't have those vertical lines or column dividers in there that sort of like, Word might automatically put in or that kind of thing. Get rid of them. Right? You might get someone who's not fussy about it, but you might get someone who is, particularly as you go on past first year. Remove the vertical lines. Make sure, as always, that you carefully label your units. You want to put the independent variable on your left that has your different factors. For figures, figure captions go below figures. So for a table, you have to put the description above. For a figure caption, you have to put it below. Remove grid lines from the background. If in doubt, go for grayscale. So I had a bit of this shock when I was in second year bio, and we'd like handed in our assessments, and we were told, after we'd handed it in, why these in colours are meant to be in grayscale, and say I had no idea. So I'm telling you now, if you have someone who's sticking to like formal conventions, if in doubt, go for grayscale colours. Make sure you use clear axis labels and label units. Again, because you have the figure caption, you don't really need a like title over your chart. The figure caption takes place of that, but it's more descriptive. In terms of general best practice for figures, use a baseline of 0 to avoid being deceptive. Avoid pie charts. They're just a bad idea. Don't do it. If you have two quantitative variables, right, so your IV and your TV are both quantitative, you want to use a line graph. In order to differentiate it, if you have multiple lines going across there, instead of just using color, try using dashed lines, dotted line versus solid line to differentiate the different categories. If you're doing that, you will need to also include a legend to show what each of those are. And generally, this isn't a hard and fast rule, because sometimes your data might best be displayed using another scale, but use a linear scale. So your like y-axis values go up like 1, 2, 3, 4, or like 10, 20, 30, 40, instead of being like 1, 100, a million, a billion. Using a linear scale can make the data easier to intuitively understand. So I've got an example. This is some mock-up that I just made very quickly in Excel after dumping some data in there. It initially actually put them both as columns, which confused me because I don't, normally use Excel these days. What needs to change here in order to make this? So there's a fair few different things that are wrong, and I would want to change if I was putting this in a report. You can submit multiple answers, so you can just, chuck in one thing that's relevant and then go for another thing later. You don't have to do it all. Yeah, changing to grayscale is one thing I could do. It would make it more formal. In this case, because I'm not using the color for actual meaning, I would probably get away with it. And like it, really wouldn't be a big deal. But if I had something who's particularly harsh, then changing it to grayscale would be absolutely safer. And that way you're guaranteed to not be knocked for that. Scale sort increases linearly. So this one is actually a linear scale because it increases by the same amount each time. So see here how it's like 5, 10, 15, the increments are always 5. If it was a non-linear scale, it might go something like, instead of 5, 10, 15, 5, 10, 200, 3000. Right, axis titles are required, so unit of measurement are known, absolutely. That's a pretty blatant one. What would I need to make sure I included in them? gonna a couple of hints here. What's in here? Yeah, so with the temperature title, that's fine. There's something missing there. So you could probably imply, but like, do you think this is in Kelvin, for example? From the figure, we have no idea. We would want to make sure that we put the units in there in brackets. For this enzyme activity, would want that to go across to an axis title. We really don't need a legend here because we only have one thing that we're graphing, so that's redundant and would get rid of it. Basically, you want to get rid of anything that doesn't need to be there, because then that's just distracting from the interpretation of your data. So we would, get rid of the enzyme activity label, put it on the axis title where it belongs. Temperature, and that's for our axis title, we need to put our units in there. Same thing, we'd want units for enzyme activity. We had them. What about this? Is this the kind of way to present a university figure? There's also something wrong here. I'm going to flick back because these are more university-specific changes. About these first 2 points. Do we have a figure caption on this? Should we be using a title or should we be using a figure caption? There should be a figure caption, absolutely. So with this, temperature going on the y-axis, usually temperature does belong on the y-axis, often it does. In this case, because we're looking at enzyme activity, which depends on temperature, temperature being on the x-axis is actually fine because temperature is acting as our dependent variable. But you are right that often temperature would be on the y-axis because often temperature would be our dependent variable. We would get rid of this enzyme activity title, would put it in a detailed figure caption. The figure caption kind of like, one way of thinking about it is that it stops people from taking your graph really out of context, right? When people will crop things on the internet to try and make it support their narrative. With the figure caption, that provides a bit of context to your figure, which then makes it a lot harder for someone to do that. That's not the only reason to have it there, but it is something that it achieves. Another thing is that I would get rid of these horizontal lines in the background. Again, this is something you might not be penalised for in, say, first year, but it could randomly sneak up on you at some point that you get marks taken off you for that. Generally, those lines in the background are a no-go because you don't need them and seen as distracting from the data. So if I wanted to make this properly, I would get rid of those background lines, get rid of the title, get rid of the legend, put in the axis titles with the units in brackets, and put down a more detailed figure caption. Alright, I'm going to close this off. Thank you everyone for your answers. As you can see, there are some things that you have to change that in high school that you don't have to worry about. And then we've got this question. With presenting data on graphs, what did I mean about having the IV on the left? Also, on a figure, you do want the IV on that y-axis, which will be on the left. But what I was talking about there is more tables. So if you're presenting a table of data, then whatever your kind of important factor is that you think might be causing these changes, your independent variable, you put in the leftmost column. Like don't put it in the middle of your table somewhere, put it over there on the left. Let me know or like resubmit if that doesn't answer your question fully. So on this next page I've put in, this is a figure I made a couple years back. So you can see it's a bit of a different type of figure with a bit of information on it. I've got my labels here, I've got latitude and longitude, looking at a particular area. I've got my legend indicating what my different colours mean. Because I'm showing something spatial, I have a scale. And then in my figure caption, I'm saying, well, this is what it's showing. Right, so these are my eDNA proportions over the study area as predicted by the hydrodynamic model I was using. Colours indicating the eDNA proportion deciles. So that means that, one 10% grouping of the data is in red, one is in the yellow, one is in the green. And then I've indicated what the NA is referring to, and that the numbers at the top of each figure indicate hours past start time. So you can see the figure there, caption is like a fair bit longer than what a title would be, provides a bit more information. In this case I have used colours, but these are also colours that if it was converted to grayscale, you could still see the difference between them. So colours aren't an absolute no-no, but if you, it's best to not rely on them where you don't have to try and use some other form, and particularly if you're doing like kind of Excel type graphing, grayscale is safer.